Hello and welcome to the last, I know we've finally reached the end, in our series of podcasts for Equine Health Week 2024, all of which have been themed around the topic of equine wellbeing. This weekend, the focus has been on welfare, which is always an important topic, but one that's very much come to the fore in recent years in the guise of social licence and public acceptance of equestrian sport. While social licence is often focused on the sharp end of the sport, it's something that affects our entire industry from grassroots all the way up to the upper echelons of competition. Ensuring the health and happiness of our horses should be at the forefront of everything we do, starting with how we keep them, train them, and interact with them. To get a better understanding of this, I'm joined by two leading vets from World Horse Welfare. First of all is Rowley Owers. He's the Chief Executive of World Horse Welfare and a qualified veterinary surgeon. He plays an active role in the steering group of the British Horse Council, chairs the Equine Disease Coalition, is treasurer for the British Equine Veterinary Association, and is on the management board of the European Horse Network. So he's pretty busy. Welcome, Rowley.
Hi, Rachel. Great to be with you.
And joining Rowley is Janet Douglas. She is a research and education consultant at World Horse Welfare and an honorary assistant professor at the University of Nottingham. She uses her experience in research, scientific writing and education to influence equine welfare, including on equestrianism's social licence to operate. Welcome, Janet.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you for inviting me.
So let's get the ball rolling then. First of all, why don't you each tell me what equine well-being means to you? Because that's been our topic for this week.
Okay. For me, there's many different ways of describing it, especially because obviously well-being with humans is quite well understood, or certainly better understood than it was. But for our equines, literally it means feeling good and functioning well. And I think the key thing for when we think about equine well-being and the well-being of our horses is that we recognise there's a real physical need for our horses. And that is where so much of the focus has traditionally been around their physical well-being, their physical welfare. But as important, if not more important, than their physical well-being and physical welfare is their mental well-being. And so it's actually how horses are feeling about themselves, around being able to provide our horses with positive experiences, and that creates a feeling of well-being. So for me, yes, it's around that physical piece and around that mental piece.
That's a great point there, because as you say, a lot of people think of the physical stuff, they don't think of the mental side of it as well, which is incredibly important. Janet, what about you?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd agree with everything Rowley said, and I think physical health most of us understand and are very conversant with, but so much of it is to do with the horse's emotions and whether the horse has what it wants and how they feel about what's happening to them in their life. And there's a concept that is being, I think, probably increasingly talked about called telos, which is, it basically describes the inherent nature of any animal. So it's been described as like the pigness of the pig or the dogness of the dog. And in our situation, it's the horseness of the horse. So for me, a part of giving a horse having good well-being or giving it good welfare, and the two terms are often used pretty synonymously, would be allowing the horse to satisfy its natural instincts, or as I say, it's telos, this term that's being used. And as Rowley said, it's not just, I think for a long time we've thought about well-being or welfare as not avoiding doing bad things to our horses or our animals, but we need to think increasingly about the positive that we can do, the good things that we can add to their lives.
That's a great answer. I really like that. So, okay, so now we've talked about what we should be doing with our horses. Let's go into maybe some of the hows. How should we be, or what should we be doing to ensure that well-being both physically and mentally?
Physical welfare is, we need to provide, good health care, providing them the right nutrition for what we're involving our horses with, whether they're leisure riders, elite sport horses or whatever. So there's some real basics there. And the easier thing around a lot of the physical, like what the temperature of my horse is, there's a black and white answer. It's this is fine, and this is on the border, and this is not fine. So it is around sort of providing that basics. It's certainly not sort of saying physical well-being is not important just because mental well-being is also important. So we absolutely need to provide that physical side, but on the mental well-being, it then picks up on what Janet was talking about there. It's around allowing. So often you hear people talk about, our horses are treated like kings or queens. Well, they didn't really want to be treated like kings or queens. They want to be treated like horses. And so there's basics that we know that horses need. And we'll come on to talk about it later, I'm sure, around the ability to have friendship, around ability for forage for most of the day, and around the freedom of movement. So I think it is being able to look in what we have traditionally sort of managed our horses, and it's what we need to do throughout our approach, is to keep an open mind. Just because we have cared and managed and worked with the horse in a particular way for many months or years doesn't necessarily make it right, especially in the light of new evidence. And when we come to that mental well-being side, how we recognize that, how we measure that, and how we know what's right and what maybe could be improved that is improving all the time. So we need to keep that open mind, and we need to have that thirst to be able to go out and be open to new knowledge, to new understanding. Of course, where you get that from is a separate topic. But yeah, that's challenging the status quo and having an open mind to be able to look after our horses in a different way.
Yes, well, I think, certainly, as Roly said, the question you asked was about the how, and the how of physical health is much easier because we know more, as Roly said. The how of providing for them mentally is it's more difficult. There's a growing body of knowledge from which we can all learn. Equine behaviorists, sociologists, we can all, there's stuff that we can all learn, and more information coming out all the time. So that, but currently there's less known. I think in terms of the how on the health side, I think one of the things I'm increasingly aware of is how much looking after a horse well is a team effort, and that it's useful to, as a horse owner, to surround yourself with a team of good people, and if you can get them to talk to each other and not just relay the information through you, that's even better. So your vet, if you can, should be an experienced equine vet. So and then all the team that you would need, the farrier, the dentist, if you employ a dentist other than a vet, physio, or any body worker that you employ. So for me, there's this sort of team aspect to looking after, particularly a competition horse, but actually it applies to any horse, because they all need input from these different professionals who have different areas of expertise.
And it's interesting that Janet says that, because that's exactly what we do at World Horse Welfare with the we've got 4 rescue and rehoming centres, and they have this team approach where the groom is very much the centre of that, looking after each of the horses or ponies in our care. But then there is a team, and every Tuesday is team day at the farm. So the vet and the farrier will always be there, but then the saddler, the physio, and the many other professionals, equine dental clinicians, all the other professionals are there on that day when needed, because each of the horses is going through an action plan. So it is very much a team effort. And just like in human medicine, the vet is obviously the one who has that training and ability and that experience. But when you get into specialist areas, when you're talking about physios and equine dental technicians, it's often better to get someone who's specialist for that. So it's having that team approach, and the challenge of the how there is often that some vets and farriers and physios and dental clinicians are better at working with each other than others. So it does sometimes a bit of a trial and error to get the right team around you.
Definitely, but as you say, if you can manage that feat, then the results are definitely worth it, because you have that conversation, you have that open dialogue between each other, and it's something that we very much talked about at the start of this week. There is the Monday podcast. I encourage you to go back and listen to it if you haven't already, focused on this exact topic, and it is a really important one. So then, if we're looking at maybe assessing our horse's well-being, or maybe listening to what he's trying to tell you. Obviously, horses can't talk. They can't tell us that maybe they've got a bit of pain in their foot, or that they're a bit uncomfortable, or maybe a bit stressed out by a situation like a human could, they're going to have to try and tell us through another way. So what are maybe some of the signs we should be looking for in our horse's behaviour that something's not right?
For me, I think, Rachel, the key here is knowing what's abnormal. And I think in such a busy life with our horses, sometimes each horse is a personality, each horse is an individual. So it's really important for you to know what is normal for your horse. Because if you know what's normal, both within their physical parameters, because a horse's body temperature will vary a little bit between different horses, but also their behaviour and how they are behaving. If you know what's normal, then you're going to be much quicker at picking up the abnormal. And then that takes time to do that, but then it's much easier to listen and read the signs that your horse is telling you. But then we do have an increasing number of aids to us, in terms of pain, for example. There's quite a lot of research looking at the equine pain face, and some techniques have been validated. So actually, by looking at your horse's face, looking at its nostril, its eyes, its ears, you can actually identify a horse that is in pain. Now, obviously, then that needs follow up through a vet to find where the seat of that pain is. But the likes of Sue Dyson with her behavioural ethograms in ridden horses has begun to shine a light very much on what a ridden horse is telling us. And she has developed this ethogram which has 24 behaviours within it, or signs within it, and some of those are within the face, but it goes throughout the whole body. Toe dragging when ridden, tail swishing, ears back, all of these kind of things. And if 8 of those measures are present in our horses when ridden, then they're likely to be suffering from orthopedic pain. So there's lots of techniques that are beginning to materialize, but as I say, it's around primarily knowing what is normal for your horse, and then you can identify what's abnormal so much easier.
Yeah, I would reiterate all of that, and I think I'm increasingly aware of to some extent what a blunt instrument I've been over the years in not being able to pick up on what a horse is telling me, and I've learned a lot by listening to other people and realizing that if I watch, because it's the only way the horse has of telling us is what they're feeling is their facial expression and their behavior. But the subtleties of facial expression, and I'm far from expert, but the subtleties of facial expression that if you take the time to learn can tell you a lot. And I also think that if there was a really nice webinar actually that World Horse Welfare did not so long ago with Renata Larson on aggression, and she has a lovely example of somebody failing to read the early signs. And I think if we, because there's a safety issue, we know that being around horses has safety implications for people and for horses. And I think if we can, all of us, learn to read subtle signs from horses earlier, then that may, what may seem to us to come out of the blue as an explosive behavior actually didn't come out of the blue at all. The horse was telling us, and we just failed to listen and to respond appropriately. So I think improving our ability to recognize subtle behaviors could improve our safety and horses' behavior. And I think another point I want to make about behavior is certainly some of the behaviorists I've talked to, if a horse is displaying an unwanted behavior, and the owner may employ a behaviorist, then one of the first questions that many of them ask is about how the horse is managed. And I think we'll probably come on to that. But suboptimal management of the horse and failing to fulfill its needs, not giving it enough forage, not giving it socialization, cooping it up, these things can all lead to behaviors that are unwanted, that actually could be solved if we manage the horse differently. And that's just its way of expressing what's going on.
And I think something, obviously you mentioned there about behaviourists and maybe getting some help if you want to try and understand what your horse is saying a bit better. If someone's in that position, they're looking for a behaviourist. Obviously, there's a lot of information out there. There's a lot of misunderstanding out there. Do you have any advice for someone who's looking for that, for sort of an expert who's qualified enough to help you with this?
So the people who are most qualified, to my knowledge, will be people who are on the CCAB register, and they're certified clinical animal behaviorists. And that's a rigorous, it's pretty demanding what they have to, the knowledge that they have to acquire and the cases that they have to have seen in order to acquire that qualification. It's not that widespread yet, but I hope it'll grow. But that would be if I had a problem with a horse and I was within reach of a CCAB registered person, then that's where I would go. And some of them I know will consult remotely. I've done that with a horse, and it's been really useful. So you can use videos. You can and obviously an online meeting, video the horse as it's progressing, and it's been a really constructive way of helping to move the problem forward.
So it's cropped up a few times while we've been talking, this sort of these freedoms, I think, Rowley, you called them earlier. What actually are they, and how should we be implementing them into our horses management?
Well, the 3 Fs, as they're often known, sometimes known as 4 Fs, but the 3 Fs are friends, freedom, and forage. And I think it's the reason for that is that when we think of the evolutionary sort of timescale of horses, actually we've domesticated them fairly late on. So they've been around for a good period of time, and therefore these innate needs, as we describe them, are still pretty fundamental and in the core of our horses. And it is, naturally horses would graze in herds for up to 17 hours a day and have freedom to move across the plains uninhibited. And so that is at the core of what we need to try and provide our horses, because we know that the 3 Fs, sometimes known as the 4th F is sometimes known as fun. We tend to focus on the 3 because obviously fun is related, but not core in what we're trying to sort of focus on here. So it's being able to provide our horses with forage for up to 17 hours, good quality forage for up to 17 hours a day. It's being able to for them to have friendship groups, so have time with other horses. And it's time for them to have agency, freedom of choice around movement, so that they have an ability to during the day, ideally all day, but obviously if that can't be possible for part of the day, to be able to have that freedom of movement so they can roll, interact with other horses, and do what they want to do when they want to do it. And so that's what the 3S is all about. And I think it is one of the most challenging aspects of equine care and management now, because the way a lot of horses are management make the provision of the 3S quite challenging. But that doesn't mean they're still not important. And so it's really important that we look at ways of managing them in the best possible way.
And I think in terms of, so Rowley's covered that really nicely. Just to add, so examples on the friends front. So as Rowley said, many of us are limited in what we can provide, particularly in Britain in the winter. But a nice example for me was the Manchester police horses involved some experts to come in, and they looked at their stabling, the way they stabled these horses. And these horses are stabled 24/7. And they heavily modified the stables, and they basically they modified them such that the horses could touch their neighbours while stabled. And having talked to Andrew McLean, who was involved in this work, this was obviously this is a pretty brave decision for the police to do this. And so there's a bit of argy-bargy at the beginning, but once they got this pairing right, they found that it helped the horses enormously. And astonishingly to me, they said the horses were braver on patrol as a result, or presumably as a result. Certainly that's what happened. After they changed the stabling, these horses were braver. And I think that really hit home to me as what a difference we can make to our horses by just providing them with these basic needs. And as I said just a minute ago, in terms of behavior, unwanted behaviors, and many behaviorists will come back to this. This will be their starting point. What can you do to provide your horse with the 3 Fs and then we'll talk about the behavior. But let's try and make sure that failure to fulfill these basic needs is not a driver in these behaviors. And I think also when Roly talked about the forage, it's also we need to appreciate that horses evolved as hindgut fermenters. They evolved to have cellulose in their gut that is broken down in the large intestine by bacteria, and that's how it provides them with energy. So it's not just a behavioral need, it's a physiological need. And we know that if you don't provide enough fiber, it's a colic risk. There are many management and dietary factors that are known risks for colic, and colic's pretty common in horses. And I think if we could minimize those colic risk factors, I strongly suspect that the incidence of colic would go down.
No, that was great, because that sort of very much demonstrates the idea here that we're talking about physical and mental well-being, because you've said there about they need this stuff to kind of be happy, but obviously you've then got the real health links there with the colic and and ulcers as well as another one with horses, if they're not having enough forage. It's really important that we try and set our horses up here for success. But obviously, as you've said, we, particularly now we're recording this, it's January, and we've had a very, very cold spell, and now we're back to mud and wet weather. And a lot of our horses are not necessarily getting as much turnout as they might otherwise get in other parts of the year. It's very muddy. There's not a lot of grass. I guess there are times where we do have to compromise maybe in certain areas, these 3 or, as you said, 4 freedoms. But I guess then it must be just a matter of kind of prioritizing and as you say, compromising what you're doing with your management to ensure that at least some parts of the day, some of these are met.
But we recognise. Like life itself, nothing's going to be 100% the whole time, and absolutely. But what equally you hear quite a lot. You say, "Oh well, it's muddy outside, and this is all we've got, so this is all we can do." Well, that kind of attitude is equally, unacceptable. You've got to be able to think laterally, sometimes think a bit differently, and so a lot of yards will have sand arenas, for example, sand school arenas, and or different material. But you can put the horses out there each day for as much time as you can to allow them that freedom of movement. Janet's already talked around, stable design. Of course, that's an expensive thing to do, but the next time you look at the stable design, you bring that kind of issue very much to the core of what you're looking to design. But there's sometimes often very simple things you can do within the stable to allow horses the opportunity, taking down partitions between stables so that you can allow them to talk to each other during the day. Horses, of course, are individuals. Some don't get on with each other. Some prefer to be a bit more time on their own. So again, it's about knowing what's good for your horse. So there are plenty of options there available around changing them and getting them out of the stable for more often during the day than just taking them out for an hour's riding, because we often talk about the other 23. Lots of focus around the horses that's ridden for its hour, but what happens to the horse in the other 23 hours? And so it's a matter of thinking what you can do from a management perspective to help create as a positive an environment. And of course, for those horses that are stable long term, you can, during the course of the year, you can hopefully get them out so they're out at grass 24/7. So you're looking at it in the whole year sort of basis, not just on the individual day basis. So you're over the course of the year, those we recognise it's sort of the utilitarian view of welfare is all about looking at the harms and the benefits, and we recognise that sometimes there are harms. Our job is to minimise those harms and maximise those benefits over the course of the horse's lifetime. And so you're looking at it not only short-term, day-to-day, but you're looking at it long-term too.
And I think to add to that, so I absolutely recognise how challenging it is in the winter for many of us in terms of giving our horses what they really need. But I mean, it could be as simple as getting the horse out and taking it for a walk in hand. It doesn't need to be on board, and then preferably do that with a friend. Take another horse. So now the horse has the opportunity, has some exercise, it's getting out, it's got some mental stimulation, and it's got the opportunity to socialise with another horse. I think for anybody who has the opportunity, Crew yards are a great way to go, and it can be, if you have that, and it can be really brave. We're all, I think, conditioned to worry, particularly about horses that are, you know, competition horses, and we worry about putting them in together. But it can be massively beneficial for the horses. And a nice example came from, so we ran a media event in June of last year, and there was a short video from William Whitaker, show jumper, about how he had a horse that was displaying behavioural issues in the stable, and the horse's owner was brave enough to say, this horse's mental welfare comes first, and I need this horse. I would like this horse to be somewhere other than the stable. And William had the option. He had big barns where he had horses sectioned off within this space with a central source of forage. This horse's behaviour was transformed, and so sometimes I think we need to just be brave, be creative, and be brave. And look at and think a bit outside the box and look at what other people are doing, because it can really benefit our horses.
Yeah, definitely. It's very much, well, you took the words out of my mouth. It's thinking outside the box. It's coming up with creative solutions to try and as you say, balance these things out and help our horses in the best way. You mentioned there, Roly, we had the other 23 hours of the day, but that 24th hour, that hour that you're in the saddle or training or whatever, that must also be a really important time when we're looking at welfare and well-being and making sure our horses are happy and healthy.
Absolutely, and that's an area where there probably has been a huge development over the last 10 or 15 years, and that's in how we understand our horses learn. And this whole concept of equine learning theory is really sort of moving forward. And so I would say, you know, the classic time of a horse that stops at a fence and the rider takes the stick out and gives the horse a hit with the stick. Now, it's very difficult to imagine. Now, knowing what we know about how horses learn, nearly every time the horse won't have a clue what it's being hit for, because it's not quick enough in terms of relating what it's done to the action that's done to it. So we need to absolutely, in keeping this open mind about how we ride and train our horses, make sure that we have a good understanding of equine learning theory, what we mean about positive reinforcement to negative reinforcement, what operant conditioning means as opposed to classical conditioning. Now, these all sound very spooky terms if you've not heard them before, but certainly through World Horse Welfare website and others, there are wonderful resources where you can just go and learn and understand what operant and classical conditioning is, what equine learning theory is, so that when we ask our horse to do things, when we communicate with our horses, we are ensuring to the best possibility that we can that the horse will understand what we're asking of it. And so often what we're asking it just simply does not understand, and that leads to poor behavior, that leads to naughty horses, but it's all if it's not related to pain, it's often related to how they're trained. So that for me is the real plea around that how we ride our horses is making sure that we have a good understanding of how horses learn.
I would absolutely echo that, and I think what I'm learning is that what horses need more than anything from us is predictability, and that comes from consistency on our part. And as Roly's talked about, you know, operant condition, the negative reinforcement, positive reinforcement, it's not easy. It sounds, once you got your head around the concepts, or certainly I thought, you get your head around the concepts and you think, well, you know, this sounds pretty obvious. It isn't. And getting it right is surprisingly difficult. Getting it right for the horse is surprisingly difficult in terms of timing, and spotting your own behaviors and how you might inadvertently be doing something that the horse is picking up on, and actually you don't realize that you're doing that. So, and I think the other concept to take on the time. So I think what I would say is it's worth learning from. It's worth learning, investing in the time to learn from experts. And I think the other concept that's worth taking on board is that we're training horses all the time. So I think it's very easy to think, oh, now I'm training a horse. And then you go and you do something else with your horse, but you're not training it now, so that's fine. But actually, the horse makes no distinction at all. So if you allow it to do, if you have rules for why you think you're training, and then you break those rules when you're just puttering around with your horse, and then that's inconsistent, and you're now unpredictable for your horse, and that's hard. That's harder. That's much harder for them. And then it's very easy to think, oh, well, the horse has got it wrong. The horse is being misbehaved. Well, the horse isn't misbehaving. You're just being inconsistent. So I think I try very hard now. My mindset is always, if the horse doesn't do what I want, the first thing that goes through my head is, how did I ask the question? Where did I go wrong in asking the question? And usually, if I think about it hard enough, I'll figure out that it was my fault.
So basically, it's a degree of self-awareness then that we should be having around our horses whenever we're around them. Is, as you say, it's that constant questioning of, why have I got the outcome here that I've been given by this horse? Because, as we said earlier, horses don't speak our language. We have to kind of come to this, meet in the middle somewhere, I guess is what I'm trying to say here, so that we're communicating with them in a way they understand, and vice versa. Now, something I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast that I think ties in to all this kind of welfare stuff that we're talking about today is social license, or social acceptance as it's also sometimes known. And I know, Roly, this has been a bit of a passion project for you. Could you maybe explain to people listening what actually is social license to operate?
Certainly will do. I mean, it's a passion project for me. It's a passion project for World Horse Welfare, and Janet is very much part of that journey too. Social license is nothing new. It's around, as you said, public acceptance, and in our case, to ride horses. It's not written. There's no legal contract here, but it's the permission of society for us to be able to ride our horses, to compete our horses, and our relationship with animals, our relationship with the planet, as we know, is changing sort of so rapidly. And if we look back in history, we have involved animals, subjected animals to activities like bear baiting and so many other examples. And zoos are a more recent, circuses, where public has really questioned and sometimes rejected activities that we have undertaken with our animals. And equine, the world of equestrianism is not divorced to this, and we can see that both, especially within racing, but also in wider horse sport, where people are increasingly asking questions about what we're doing. Is it right what we're doing? And sometimes they can take that questioning can be done in a very direct, confrontational way. So at its core, social license is around doing right by our horses and being seen to do right by our horses. So there's some people who think social license is very much about the communication, about how we talk about how we care and train and manage our horses. Absolutely, the communication aspect is really important, because if the public, if society thinks something and it's not really true, then that's still a problem. So you need to manage that through how we talk and communicate around the sector. But equally, more important than that is how we look after and care and do right by our horses. And we've covered so much of that today that the public would expect part of our license to be able to carry on riding horses is to make sure we're trying to implement everything we've talked about today as effectively as possible. And if we're not doing that, then the public will increasingly ask those questions, and they'll have more justification to ask those questions. The final comment I'd make on this is the fact that quite a lot of research has been done over the last 2 or 3 years by World Horse Welfare, by the International Equestrian Federation. And this is not just an us against them, equestrian world thinks this, the public think that. Actually, there's a lot of people within the equestrian world who are questioning what we are doing. So it is very much, those within sort of questioning, saying, is this right? So the thing about social license, it's constantly changing. Public opinion, what society thinks is constantly changing. So it's never going to be something that this time next Monday we can just put our feet up and say, yep, we have our social license now we can move on. It's going to change, so we need to change with it. And part of that is being proactive, and part of that is being reactive. But unless we take it seriously, then I think we recognise that there's a real challenge going forward, and an increasing challenge. And we know what happens to sectors that lose their social licence.
Exactly, and I mean, it's like I alluded to at the start. A lot of this stuff becomes because of the sort of the higher levels of the sport, but then because that's what's more televised and what more of the outside world, that's the level they're coming into because they're watching equestrian sport on the television or seeing it out there. But it is something that every one of us has to take on board. As you say, it starts with the welfare of our horses and how we keep our horses, and by setting that good example, hopefully it'll ripple effect out and the whole industry will take a moment maybe to think about how it's doing things, assess how it's doing things. And in some ways we're doing things very well, in other ways, as you say, there are things we could do better. And it's all about that positive momentum forward to make our sport the best that it can be, really, I guess.
Absolutely.
Roly has covered that beautifully. But I think I would urge people, and I absolutely agree, Rachel, this is across the sport, it applies to all of us. And I would urge people not to think of this as scaremongering, because as Roly said, some industries have gone by the board because they didn't pay attention to public opinion, and that includes some aspects of equestrianism. Jump racing in Australia is almost non-existent now. Pentathlon, riding has gone from the modern pentathlon in the Olympics after Paris. So it's a slippery slope. But I think, but also we know there's plenty of information out there, particularly from other industries. So certainly there are many parts of equestrianism who are being proactive about this now. But there's also support from other industries. And in a few weeks, there'll be available on the World Horse Welfare website a recording from a conference that we're running on exactly this, but looking at inviting in speakers from other industries who have faced a public acceptance challenge and have had the vision and the courage to grasp the nettle and to change what they did. And their industries have come out the other side stronger and more confident. And in many cases, it's actually improved the industry, even though it felt scary at the beginning and they felt threatened and a lot of them didn't know what to do. They were brave about their approach, and it has benefited the industry in the long term. And the flip side of the coin being that if they stuck their heads in the sand, then there are industries that have gone down because of that. If you think about, I don't know, use of live animals in circuses. So that's now, as of 2019, that's no longer legal in the UK. So it's pretty much an imperative, I think, for equestrianism that they take this seriously and get on the front foot and stay ahead of the game.
I'll just add to that, Rachel. I think it is absolutely everything that Janet said, but it's also an opportunity. To every threat there is an opportunity, and I think if people take on board what we've been discussing today, if they're open-minded, if they have this thirst for knowledge to improve how they're carrying them out, I think there's a really secure future for our involvement of horses in our lives and in society. So take the opportunities, recognise, as you said, there's lots that's been done that's good, but there's a fair degree that's been done that needs improvement or changing. And so it's reinforcing the good and bringing in improvements where we need to. And if we show and clearly can prove that, then I think you've got a very secure future indeed for the sector.
Thank you. That was really well put, I think. We're coming to the end now of what has been a really interesting and hopefully very thought-provoking conversation. What would be your one take-home message from what we've discussed today that people at home should take away with them?
For me, it's around. Sorry, I'll said it before, but it's two: challenging the status quo, not feeling, we're very sort of small c conservative, often with how we manage our horses. Challenge that and be open to finding out and learning more, being open-minded around how our horses learn, how we should be providing the 3Fs in a different and more novel way, given the circumstances that we have. So yeah, challenging the status quo and being open-minded.
Brilliant. What about you, Janet?
I think mine in many ways would be similar. I think what's obvious from what we've talked about today is how much of what we've talked about is interconnected. And the same principles are coming up again and again and again, no matter which way you look at it. And I think we all of us who are involved with horses need to use these principles to provide our horses with a life that they enjoy. And that would be the 3 Fs, the ways of assessing how well we're doing that. What we haven't talked about is the 5 domains, which is a framework that is increasingly used in equestrianism to assess equine welfare. So and it's all in there. Everything we've talked about is in there if we look for it. So I think we owe it to our horses, to ourselves, and to the future of the sport to keep learning, as Roly said, to be open-minded and to keep learning from those people who know more than we do and who perhaps are outside our frame of reference. Look to the behaviorists, the welfare scientists, the ethologists, and just see what you can learn, because there'll be things you'll pick up, nuggets you'll pick up that you could incorporate into your own management of horses that will improve things for them and for you and for the sport.
Thank you. Well, as I said, this has been a really interesting conversation, and I hope it sort of sparked some synapses in people's brains. As you both mentioned, World Horse Welfare has got some brilliant resources on all this stuff, so make sure you head to their website, have a read there, use that as a starting point maybe to take you off in other directions. Thank you both to Roly and Janet for your time today, and yeah, I hope you've enjoyed telling us about these areas that you're clearly both very passionate about.
Thank you, Rachel. We love it. We're still learning, and it's an exciting journey ahead, but really appreciate being part of the Equine Health Week.
Absolutely. Thank you, Rachel.
Brilliant. Well, to everyone listening, I hope you've enjoyed everything that we've put out for Equine Health Week. If you've missed any of it, you can go to our website. There's a dedicated page there that's got all the podcast episodes, everything that's been going out on social media. So yeah, you've got no excuses for missing anything, and we hope that we'll see you soon.